Junior Minister Douglas Ross has resigned after Dominic Cummings' defence of his trip to County Durham during the coronavirus lockdown. The Scotland Office Minister said the senior aide's view of the government guidance was not shared by the vast majority of people. Mr Cummings has explained why he drove 260 miles in March from his home to his parents' farm with his wife and child. Number 10 said the Prime Minister regretted Mr Ross's decision to stand down. In a statement announcing his resignation, Mr Ross, who remains Tory MP for Moray, said, "While the intentions may have been well-meaning, the reaction to this news shows that Mr Cummings' interpretation of the government advice was not shared by the vast majority of people who have done as the government asked. I have constituents who didn't get to say goodbye to loved ones, families who could not mourn together, people who didn't visit sick relatives because they followed the guidance of the government. I cannot in good faith tell them they were all wrong and one senior advisor to the government was right." A Number 10 spokesman said, "The Prime Minister would like to thank Douglas Ross for his service to government and regrets his decision to stand down as Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Scotland." Mr Cummings has faced calls to resign after it emerged he had driven his child and ill wife from London to County Durham during lockdown. At a news conference in the garden of 10 Downing Street on Monday afternoon, he said he did not regret his actions and believed he acted reasonably and legally. On the subject of why he then drove his family to the town of Barnard Castle 15 days after he had displayed symptoms, Mr Cummings said he was testing his eyesight to see if he could make the trip back down to London. He explained that he had experienced some eyesight problems during his illness. Douglas Ross backed Boris Johnson to be Tory leader and is not one of those in the party seen as hostile to his style of government. So this resignation is a blow, and could point to wider discontent. There is a Scottish subplot. The Scottish Tories have been accused of hypocrisy for demanding Scotland's chief medical officer resign, then staying quiet about Dominic Cummings. Mr Ross's reasons for resigning are scathing. He says he cannot tell his constituents in good faith that they were wrong to miss funerals and other family events, but Mr Cummings was right. He says he has listened to his constituents and resigned. The question now is whether other Tory MPs are continuing to get the same feedback. Labour's shadow Scottish Secretary Ian Murray said Mr Ross had done the decent thing by resigning. He understands that it's not acceptable to have one rule for Boris Johnson's closest advisor, another for everybody else, he said. The SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford said he respected Mr Ross for taking the difficult decision to resign and called for Mr Cummings to be removed from his post without further delay. "This issue transcends politics. It is about protecting trust and confidence in the public health advice," he said in a tweet. Opposition MPs are meeting to discuss their next steps in deciding how to hold Boris Johnson and his senior aide to account. Boris Johnson's spokesman reiterated Downing Street's support for Mr Cummings on Tuesday, saying the advisor had answered questions extensively. The spokesman declined to answer some questions from journalists about issues that remain unresolved, saying he was not the spokesman for special advisors and the questions would have to go elsewhere. Several government ministers have posted messages of support for Mr Cummings on Twitter. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove told the BBC Mr Cummings' account of his actions was exhaustive, detailed and verifiable, and people will make their own mind up. Asked on BBC Breakfast about the easing of lockdown measures, he added that the government is looking at how we can ensure that more people can see each other outside in a safe way. Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick said it was time for the government to move on and continue to address the things that are most important in tackling the next phase of the virus. However, William Ragg, Tory MP for Hazel Grove, said it was humiliating and degrading to see ministers defending the advisor. Veteran Tory MP Sir Roger Gale was among those calling for Mr Cummings to resign, telling the BBC he had sent out a very damaging and dangerous message to the public. And Mark Harper, Tory MP for the Forest of Dean, agreed that Mr Cummings should have offered to resign. In a statement posted on Twitter, he said he was disappointed that he had neither apologized nor expressed regret over the trip to Barnard Castle.